The film begins in the city of Valencia, where heavy rain flooded the streets, causing traffic to come to a standstill. Cars couldn't move, and both drivers and passengers were stranded. The news warned the city's residents about the intense rain and harsh weather, advising them to stay in place for their own safety. Among the halted cars was the vehicle of Sandra, the manager of Valencia Bank. She called a man named Antonio, asking if her name was on the list of people who would be leaving the bank. Antonio informed her that he hadn't received any information yet. Sandra asked him to keep it a secret if her name was indeed on the list. Sandra got out of her car in front of the bank and entered to ask about the staff who were supposed to activate the bank's alarms. The employee, Mahino, told her that no one had arrived yet due to the severe weather and dangerous road conditions, but assured her that things would settle later in the afternoon. One of the staff members noticed that Sandra seemed upset, and Mahino revealed that Sandra's name was indeed on the list of people who would be let go from the bank. When Sandra entered her office, she called Antonio again, and this time she confirmed that her name was on the list and that they had decided to let her go from the bank. This left her feeling deeply sad and anxious. At the same time, a masked armed gang attacked the bank. Some of them were wearing explosive vests, and they quickly took control of all the employees. Sandra was in her office, talking to her relative Joaquin over the phone, asking for his help before she was fired. However, Joaquin told her that there was nothing he could do to help. Meanwhile, one of the gang members, Gallego, entered her office along with his colleague Jack. They restrained Sandra to prevent her from moving. Using their tools, they began breaking into the bank's vaults to steal from the safety deposit boxes. They had also started digging a tunnel underground to smuggle the stolen goods. The gang leader, Uruguayo, tried to keep the workers under control to ensure that no one outside the bank would notice the robbery. But suddenly, he discovered that one of the employees had pressed the alarm button in the office. Uruguayo became furious, assaulted the employee who triggered the alarm, and threatened to blow up the bank. One of the hostages tried to persuade the leader not to detonate the bomb, explaining that she had a son who needed her. He allowed her to make a call to him and gave all the employees a minute and a half to contact their loved ones. However, his real intent was just to scare them, with no actual plan to kill anyone. Meanwhile, the police received the alarm signal and realized that the bank was in danger. The detective Domingo called the bank's number, only to have one of the gang members answer and threaten to blow up the hostages if the police intervened before they could get what they wanted. The criminals demanded a car and a plane for their escape after the robbery. However, Detective Domingo told them that the decision wasn't entirely his and that he needed approval from higher authorities. Later, Gallego informed his boss that they had a serious problem with the tunnel they had dug for their escape, as the water level had risen due to the heavy rain. They decided to wait for half an hour for the water to recede. During that time, Sandra spoke with Gallego and told him that she was being fired from the bank. She convinced him to steal a specific vault, explaining that it contained a significant secret. However, she refused to reveal the details until he promised her a share of the money. Elsewhere, Jones, a politician, was in a coma in the hospital. His wife, Marina, was with him when she saw the news about the bank robbery on television. Feeling extremely anxious, she called their friend, Detective Julio, to ask about the truth of the reports. Julio replied that he hadn't heard the news, so Marina told him that her husband Jones had a safety deposit box in the bank. If someone opened the box and found out what was inside, Jones would be in great danger. Julio tried to calm her down, promising to intervene. He then called his colleague, Officer Ferran, and shared with him what Marina had told him, explaining that while he didn't know what was inside the box, it was something very important. At the same time, Sandra shows a video to Gallego on a screen in which Jones is seen entering the safety deposit vault, holding a hard disk to hide it in the box he had rented. Sandra explains that Jones had previously faced a major scandal when one of his employees at the detective agency revealed his secrets. At that time, all the media outlets were talking about him, and his reputation was severely damaged. Sandra recounts that Jones collected all the corruption activities he had engaged in, along with information about the people inside the government who helped him, and stored it on the hard disk, which he kept in the bank's vault. Gallego goes to get a collection of diamonds for Sandra in exchange for her revealing the number of the box where Jones hid the hard disk. Sandra takes the diamonds and tells him that the box number is 314. Meanwhile, Uruguayo contacts Detective Domingo and asks him to bring food to the bank, warning him against putting any sedatives in the food, as they would test it on the hostages before eating it themselves. After some time, Gallego notices that the water level in the tunnel is rising, and he informs his colleagues that they need to finish the mission as quickly as possible in order to escape before things get worse. Meanwhile, the police have surrounded the bank from the outside. The criminals strap explosive belts on some of the employees, warning them not to move or the bombs will explode. Gallego returns to the area where the safety deposit boxes are kept and informs one of his colleagues that Jones's box is numbered 314. At that moment, his colleague suspects that Gallego is a traitor and that he came with them only to steal this specific box. He goes to expose him to the rest of the gang. Gallego responds that it was Sandra who told him about the box, but the rest of the gang orders him to descend into the tunnel quickly before it floods. The gang members start descending into the tunnel with the bags containing the loot. The last person uses a strong rope and pulls a desk behind him to block the opening they had dug. One of them goes alone to the end of the tunnel to see if they can swim, but he struggles to breathe and returns, informing them that the water current is too strong and uncontrollable. At that moment, the gang decides to return to the bank. They gather their strength, move the desk away from the opening, and climb out. Simultaneously, the police decide to storm the bank. Domingo contacts the criminal and tells him that the food they requested has arrived, asking him to open the bank door to receive it. One of the gang members goes to open the door, while the police take positions beside the bank wall to ambush the criminal who steps out to get the food. However, just before the door is opened, orders come for the police to abort the raid. The officers retreat, and the corrupt officials involved with Jones gather to discuss how to resolve the issue. It is then revealed that one of the officers had made a deal with Uruguayo to steal the hard disk from Jones's vault in order to protect himself. At that moment, Ferran and his colleagues become extremely angry because the officer acted without consulting them or informing them. They decide to appoint a new detective to the case named Paulo, who is one of their own and someone they trust. Detective Paulo will be responsible for delivering the hard disk to them once it is found. Meanwhile, the gang members convene and agree that as long as they have Jones's box, they are safe and will be able to escape if they use it to blackmail the officials. When Uruguayo finds out that Sandra was the one who told Gallego the box number, he becomes certain that she was bribed in exchange. He gets furious and goes to angrily knock on the bathroom door where Sandra was hiding. Uruguayo loses his temper and attacks Sandra, demanding to know what she received in return, angry at the thought that she profited from their efforts. A fight breaks out between Gallego and his colleague Uruguayo because of her. Uruguayo enters the bathroom and finds the bag of diamonds, but he discovers that the bag is empty. He becomes furious and realizes that Gallego bribed Sandra with diamonds, not cash. He informs the rest of the gang that Sandra swallowed the diamonds to prevent them from retrieving them. Meanwhile, one of the gang members, named Loco, tries to access the contents of the hard disk. However, he encounters a chess game with a puzzle, and when he selects the wrong option, the hard disk begins automatically erasing all the data. He attempts to recover the data, but fails. Later, Detective Paulo takes charge of the case and calls the bank, where Uruguayo answers. Uruguayo expresses his anger at the presence of the police around the bank as he and his gang can't escape. Paulo tells him that things will be handled differently from now on. Paulo requests a face-to-face meeting with Uruguayo as he is the leader of the gang, but Uruguayo refuses, fearing that they will kill him. Paulo promises that no one will fire at them, and Uruguayo agrees to meet him at the bank's door in 5 minutes. When he steps out to meet him, Paulo talks to him, telling him that he will help him escape since his plan failed, and therefore Uruguayo must follow his orders. After returning to the bank, Uruguayo speaks with the gang members and informs them of Paulo's plan, which involves escaping through the building next to the bank. However, the gang members are skeptical, thinking the police might set a trap there. Uruguayo responds that they will go up to the 4th floor of the building and enter an apartment through a window that will be left open for them. Once inside, they will find police uniforms to change into. At that moment, Loco confesses to Uruguayo that he accidentally lost all the data on the hard disk. Uruguayo becomes enraged and beats him. Then, Gallego steps in to try to calm Uruguayo, but when he learns what happened, he too attacks Loco. Everyone realizes that their only chance to escape peacefully has been lost. The gang flees to the building Paulo pointed out, where one of Paulo's men is waiting to help them. They disguise themselves in police uniforms, but Gallego knocks the man out by hitting him on the head, deciding to escape without being monitored by the police, so no one finds out that the hard disk they have is empty. The gang then heads down to the building's entrance, with Sandra in tow, where they encounter police guards at the entrance. The guards ask them to show their IDs and exit permits. The guards inquire about Sandra, and Gallego tells them they found her on the 5th floor, but the police don't believe them and try to prevent them from going out into the street. At that moment, the gang members aim their weapons at the police, who respond in kind, leading to a shootout between the two sides. During the fight, Sandra is shot in the arm. Gallego supports her to help her exit the building. Both Gallego and Uruguayo feel a deep sense of sorrow for her. The gang decides to leave Sandra behind, not wanting to take her with them to avoid further harm. Uruguayo asks her to stall the police for as long as possible, and they say their goodbyes before leaving. Uruguayo contacts Paulo, who asks him to take responsibility for his actions and surrender. However, Uruguayo refuses and threatens that if they don't receive a car within half an hour to transport him and his colleagues, he will be forced to kill one hostage every 15 minutes. After ending the call, Paulo speaks with Julio and understands that they need to act wisely to avoid escalating the situation, as the gang is dangerous and has a track record of knowing exactly what they're doing. They both agree that the gang must leave the bank without the hostages. Uruguayo sits with Gallego in the safety deposit vault room, and they exchange apologies for what happened between them, reconciling. Each tells the other about the events they've gone through since the last time they met before the operation. They laugh together, trying to relieve the tension and pressure they are under. Loco becomes infatuated with one of the female hostages and takes her to a separate place, giving her a large sum of the stolen money. He asks her to hide the money so she can pay off her debts after they leave the bank. He explains that the money he stole was from the vault of a corrupt politician who steals from the people, and that's why he decided to give her a portion of the amount. The woman takes the money, frightened, and hides it in her clothes before leaving the place. When the gang realizes that things aren't going as planned, they decide to resort to another solution. Uruguayo contacts Paulo and tells him they need to speak with someone who works in the government. When Paulo asks him why, Uruguayo refuses to provide details, explaining that if they don't comply with his request, he won't kill the hostages or escape with them. Instead, he will expose all the information that was on Jones's hard disk, including his illegal activities. Paulo becomes extremely worried because he is a corrupt cop involved with Jones in everything. Julio contacts Detective Ferran and asks him to meet with the gang and resolve the issue in his own way. Ferran is forced to agree since he is also involved with Jones. He meets with Gallego and Uruguayo, offering to help reduce their prison sentences in exchange for the hard disk. However, the gang tells him that they want to leave the country for good, tricking him by claiming that they saw videos of him and his superiors on the hard disk. Uruguayo orders him to bring a car to transport them from the bank. Meanwhile, Sandra is admitted to the hospital, and Ferran's secretary visits her to ask about the gang. Sandra helps her by giving some names of the gang members, mentioning that they didn't trust each other and each one was lying to the other, but she doesn't reveal the contents of the hard disk. Ferran calls Uruguayo, requesting to see the videos on the hard disk first. When Uruguayo refuses, Ferran becomes suspicious that he's lying and confronts him, saying that he doesn't have any videos. Ferran then informs his superior about what happened, and they decide to raid the bank and arrest the gang. The police send a bus for the gang, as they requested, and the hostages exit the bank to board the bus. However, it turns out that the gang had swapped their clothes with the hostages, so the police receive the hostages, believing they are the gang members. By the time the police discover the truth, the gang has already escaped with the stolen goods through the secret entrance they dug into the underground tunnel, as the water pressure in the tunnel had decreased. The gang successfully flees the country and continues their lives as usual.